So we've got 17 in the room now. We've got about 62 signed up.
Okay. Shall I give it another minute or so?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, leave it for 60 seconds or so for people to trickle in.
Okay, great. Right. Okay, let's make a start. So thank you for joining this short webinar. It'll be for an hour over your lunch, possibly. So do eat your lunch. That's more than happy for you to do that. So today we're going to be talking all about the UK steel strategy. We call this a talking heads. So there's a few slides to look at, but then we'll stop with the slides, and it's much more of a conversation between myself and Roy, particularly Roy, because he knows much more about steel strategy than me. And then there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions towards the end. Just to say, this is not necessarily an educational piece. This is very much Roy's and mine's opinion of the strategy and what we think the outcomes may be. So let me just run a few slides. So that's myself. I'm the technical director at ASBP. Been there quite a while now, actually. And I get involved in all different things at ASBP, whether it's different groups, providing support on projects, funding, all that sort of thing. My background's very much circular economy, so steel is a big part of that in terms of the scrap and also what Roy is doing in terms of the reuse steel. We also have Roy. Very pleased to welcome Roy on the call with us. So Roy is the Managing Director of Cleveland Steel and Tubes. How long have you been doing that now, Roy?
Managing director, I've been doing for 14 years. Cleveland Steel, I've been doing for 35.
So a man and boy,
Yeah.
obviously. Roy very much supports us in our work at ASBP, so we're really happy for him to have him for this hour. So this is the session today. You just got me talking now, doing a quick intro. We'll do this talking heads. We'll see how we're going on Q&A. That may be a bit later, and then we'll close at 1 o'clock. Hopefully most of us know who we are, the Alliance of Sustainable Building Products, but just a reminder, if you don't know us or you want a refresher, we're a not-for-profit mission-led organisation. I think we're up to around 170 members, which is across the supply chain. So maybe half are around manufacturers, quite a lot in the natural world, but also via reuse. We also have contractors, clients, architects, designers. So a nice broad engagement there. We do lots of different activities and events such as these. Some are in person, some are webinars, lots of guidance through our different groups such as natural fiber insulation, paint, slimes, our reuse work, for example. We look to influence policy where we can, and hopefully this today, this will help. Maybe we can give a summary of what's discussed and post it to the people that we know in government. Every little helps. And we focus on lots of different topics, reuse steel just being one of them as well. So come and join us if you're not a member. It is really worthwhile, and events like these are certainly a little bit cheaper as well. So just wanted to mention about our Reuse Now campaign, which Roy is a sponsor of, as well as Concrete Centre, Optima and Reusefully. So this is led by my colleague Debbie Ward. We've got a big event. We're going big in November. So we'll be publishing more details of that soon, building resilience through reuse. And that is also trying to get the message out to those who may not be converted or know that much about reuse. But we've done lots of different things, reuse guidance on glass partitions, one coming up on doors. There's a newsletter that you can sign up to, and loads of info on the website, all freely accessible. So do go and have a look. We're also very active in steel reuse research. A lot of this with Roy, and I wasn't involved in the first project with Roy, but 10 years ago.
Getting that way.
Yes. So still research to be done, which is good. My colleague Sally has been managing a lot of this. And it's all already looking at AI and how we can sort of make AI help us, whether it's looking at what type of steel it is, how much fabrication does it need, how you can have a better inventory of stock in your stockyards. And I hopefully will be sharing some of these project findings at that Reuse Now event and on our website soon. So this is Cleveland Steel and Tubes, where Roy is from. You're the biggest supplier of non-prime and repurposed tubes. Are these numbers still up to date? I don't know.
The warehouse is the same size. We've got over 100,000 tons of inventory now, including reclaimed sections.
Okay. How much space have you got left?
None. We're trying to get planning permission on another 15 acres at the back.
I see. So that's good news for you. And I guess how high can you pile your tubes? You have to be a little bit careful there, don't you?
Well, we do, for a variety of reasons. No, we're not so high. 3 meters maybe.
Yeah. I would recommend if no one's ever been, if you have not been to Roy's site, I would really recommend it. And I'm sure Roy would be
No,
happy to have site visits. It's a sight to behold.
people are always welcome. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you can see it from start to finish as well, because Roy does all the fabrication as well. So it's a really interesting place to visit. A little bit in the sticks, but we'll forgive him for that. So this is just a bit of housekeeping. If you do want to ask a question, please do use the Q&A panel, not the chat. And you can also, there's also a function to upvote other questions. I'm not sure how many questions we'll get, but if there's ones that are particularly popular, we'll obviously focus on them. Just to say that we are recording this session, and that will be shared. We'll probably do a few summaries as well. Please do keep your microphone muted unless you're invited to speak. I may ask you to speak if you want to when asking a question. If you've got any technical issues, Larry is in the back of house on the chat, so he can help you there. And more than happy if you want to ask a question anonymously, just tick that send anonymously speak box. I think that's it for housekeeping. Right, so very briefly, I'm not sure how many on the webinar are familiar with the steel strategy or not. It was published, when was it published actually? Didn't actually write that down. Was it April or May? April time? March, April?
No, I haven't. Yes is the answer. I can't remember exactly. But
Let's say spring. We'll say
about
late
18
spring.
months late.
So it's a UK steel strategy, and where it's really come from, and you only need to look at the newspapers over the last, well, quite a few years really to know that, we have issues with steel in the UK. We don't produce as much of it. There's been a massive decline. We don't have so many companies doing it. There's foreign investment. There's quotas, tariffs all over the place. There's issues with skills, communities affected by closing big steel works. So there's a whole load of things going on with steel which aren't all great, to tell the truth. So it's about time we had a steel strategy, and we do applaud the government for doing that. There is a long-term vision there. Just talking to Roy though, it's always questionable when you have a long-term vision and quite a short-term government, how much of that vision rolls through into forthcoming administrations, but that's pretty much the same for any long-term strategy. But the strategy is there to build a revitalized and resilient steel sector. Maybe we can talk in a minute about where there are sort of clear actions versus intentions, because it's probably a bit lacking on the clear actions, so to speak. And if anyone looked at the industrial strategy, which I think was published last year, steel is very much within that whole sort of foundational industry piece. So, a foundational pillar, I guess, of our economy. The strategy covers lots of different topics. I'm not sure we're going to have time to cover them all today. It'll be interesting to see from the questions where the interest is, but it costs a lot to produce steel here, or it can do. Trade, there's different subsidies in different countries. There is overcapacity in the world and they can produce steel cheaper. So that's not economy-wise, it doesn't work so well with us. We produce a lot of scrap steel, which we don't use. We need to do better at that. There's always been an ask of public procurement to use more of our British steel, if you like, steel produced in the UK. But again, that doesn't work always for various reasons. The steel strategy talks quite a bit about different types of investment, which may be through skills, R&D, or the actual sort of sites and technology themselves. There is a drive for green steel, whatever green steel means. I've never actually worked that out. And then there's talk about, specialist steel, which we can maybe talk about a bit because we don't always produce all the specialist steel that we need. So the strategy aims to stabilize the sector, ensure its viability and return and boost our domestic production. And part of that is, I guess, British steel and some protectionism possibly there as well. Upping that. So how some of the ways they're going to do that is looking at different trade measures, and we'll get into that in a minute, I suspect, coming into force, oh dear, less than a month, which is quotas and tariffs at the end of the day. We should have a little board, shouldn't we, like Donald Trump did? And then I just picked up on that CBAM as well, because I know that's been talked about a bit in this whole area. But there's a whole load more within the steel strategy, which hopefully we'll pick up on as we go. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Roy. So Roy's been looking at this steel strategy quite a lot. He's been quite active on LinkedIn. So do follow him for his opinions. So I guess, Roy, what for you are the main points of the steel strategy?
In the broadest sense, they're trying to protect the UK industry. So that's without question the intention. The problem of viability in the UK, realistically, is one of high cost, which actually means the only way you can truly protect British industry is to make people pay more for their steel and make people buy it as opposed to somebody else's. And I think when you drill down through all of it, that's really what this amounts to. There is a push towards supplying cheaper electricity as well. But in fact, even when you look at what is proposed, that still leaves us 30% dearer than Europe, 50% dearer than the US. So whilst it's a helping hand, it's not going to bring the costs down to a level of competitiveness. We currently have to import all of the ore or pig iron or anything else that we're using. So in fact, we're subject to international marketplace come what may. And in fact, at the moment, we're importing a hell of a lot of billet and coil plate anyway, because Port Talbot's not currently functioning. In real terms, the market price for sections, and my expertise is construction type products. We've already seen prices rise by nearly 50% from the start of the year to now, and that's in anticipation of this. and CBAM in.
So could you just explain why you've seen that 50 is what that is? Where is that price rise coming from and why?
So if you take ordinary sections now, I think the data I read the other day, which was in the national press, but the prices have gone from 650, £700 a tonne to £950 a tonne. The primary driver for that at the moment is actually European CBAM. So we've seen, because Europe's our largest trading partner by far, and it is for steel especially. So the European prices have risen to some extent because of the CBAM taxes. That in turn has sort of allowed for the mills, etc., to try and move the prices up. The big dilemma in Europe, and it's the thing that scares me the most here, is that when the CBAM was due to come in and their safeguard measures also change on the 1st of July, markets anticipated that. So Europeans brought steel in from all over the place. So the supply chain is rammed full. Construction's on its knees at the moment. There's very little activity. The construction index is 50 is a growth mark, and some of them are at 38 at the moment in the UK, and similarly bad throughout Europe. We have businesses in Europe that are performing as badly now as they did in 2009. So you've got a supply chain rammed full. You've got a market that's not actually very active. So as much as everybody's trying to push the price increases and get them to hold, there's a counterweight to that as well. Now in the UK steel market's always been an island. It used to be sort of referred to as the golden goose because steel prices in the UK were always elevated compared to pretty much anywhere. That's fizzled out with the domestic supply diminishing, I guess. But at the moment, the higher prices are coming from the mills, and you've got to bear in mind, steel takes, I don't know, 8 to 16 to 20 weeks to procure from mills. So in fairness, it's already been the case that these figures of 50% tariffs and 60% reduction in quotas have been kicking around for a while now. So the market's trading based on those currently, but it's an artificial scenario. It's not a question of anybody actually knowing how this will all settle out. But without question, the intention is for the prices to be higher.
Okay, well, let's come back to tariffs and quotas because we probably need to explain that a bit more in a bit. Just on the CBAM, maybe people don't actually know what that is.
Okay.
Do you want to very quickly just say what that is? It's a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Very snappy title.
It is, yeah. It's essentially a carbon tax. So the premise within Europe, which is where it's currently active, we don't get CBAM till the 1st of January next year, although there's been nothing published to give us any insight as to what that looks like. But the basic premise is you look at your carbon cost of production of goods in your home country, and then you apply a levy to the imported goods to try and make that carbon cost balance. So in Europe, it's roughly €80 a tonne currently, but it's also subsidised. It's due to ramp up over the next 5 years and become increasingly heavy as a tax or punishment on high carbon producers. The thing we have to remember at the moment is obviously we're not in the EU. So in fact, we suffer all of this stuff along with the rest of the world. So the EU is a vital trading partner, but as things stand with both our quotas and tariffs and CBAM and theirs, we're outside each other's zones. So this is impacting us fully, which really matters in the UK because we don't make everything at all. So there's a lot of things we have to buy in. And in fact, if you take British Steel as the business, which is clearly the focus of most of this effort, they also export quite a lot of stuff. Well, just as recently as the back end of last week, EU were talking about, not the right terminology, but hammering us the same way our quotas and tariffs are looking to hammer them.
Yeah.
So you could be gaining domestic demand whilst obliterating the prospect for actually exporting anything.
Of all the export, yeah, I've got you.
And I really don't know how they've balanced all these numbers out because we can't get to the bottom of data. We've tried for a number of reasons for a number of years. You can get very high level data to do with product codes, but not the granular detail required for products. And just to explain that with product quotas comes into the quotas as well. There's only 12 or 13 product codes that cover everything made out of steel. Now, I'm a pipe guy, so the easiest way I can explain that is there's only 3 codes for pipe. And basically, it's anything smaller than 16 inch and anything bigger than 16 inch and 2 different types of manufacture. They don't account for thickness, they don't account for grade, they don't account for usage type specifically. So there are pipe thicknesses, pipe grades that we can't make in the UK, which are now being quota reduced by 87% because it's rolled into the stuff that we can make. So what they're doing is they're saying, well, we've got a capacity in the UK of X million tons. We want 40 or 50% of that to be sold within the UK. Therefore, the import quotas need to be reduced to this level. And in the very basic maths, that sounds great. In practice, you don't know if the amount of import coming in is biased towards stuff that couldn't have been bought here anyway, but is still within that one product code. And the product codes aren't fit for purpose. And I've been in meetings this last few weeks. I was in one with the Business and Trade Committee, where the defence and aerospace sectors are represented. And as much as I think this is going to be bad for construction for slightly different reasons, it stands to be appalling for some of those sectors because they have to import all of their raw materials, but they're doing it on codes that have quotas applied in spite of the fact that their specific products aren't manufactured in the UK.
So the issue is we're applying quotas to products that we don't necessarily manufacture here anyway, so we're not protecting anything as such.
Well, we're protecting the basic category, if you like, but then there's a lot of unintended consequence around that.
Okay, and then there's obviously the tariffs on if you exceed the quota, isn't there, which have jumped from 25% to 50%.
Yeah, well,
so just costing more.
No, well, that's the point, is that you can't put a 50% tariff in place and not expect a price movement.
No, of course.
And particularly not when they're saying they want to meet 50% of the demand. So by definition, the other 50% will be quoted. And if it falls outside of the quota, that 50% tariff will apply. The other thing which is odd, and I've not really got to the bottom of, they talk about a 60% reduction in quotas. But I think for most downstream products, those reductions are much higher. Ours are 87, 85% on our product codes. They're biased a bit towards the EU, and any rest of world production is absolutely decimated. One of our product codes, where we ourselves buy 3,000 or 4,000 tons a year, has been reduced to 3,200 tons of total quota for the UK in a year.
So say that again, sorry. The total quota is 3,200 and you buy...
We could exceed that in any given year, but we'd buy it as a single lot, so we'll end up falling foul of 3 separate quota periods. See what I mean? So you can't bring 3,200 tons in quarter one. You can bring 800 tons in quarter one and then pay quota on tariff on the excess quantity. I mean, as an aside, we're actually looking at getting the yard bonded because that's how serious the financial uncertainty is. And we've got exclusive contracts in the UK for the surplus and downgrade material. So we're buying everything we can here, literally. And this is then how it impacts after that. And then CBAM comes in and has an impact because that's a specific and definite tax. That's not quota driven. That's actually a tax on everything. We lost you.
Sorry, my headphones are messing up, so I'm just going to take them off. Perfect storm then, I guess. So back to the steel strategy. What do you like about it?
Not a lot, I've got to be honest. My bigger problem is that it's designed, I think I wrote down, to remove barriers to investment. So what the government are hoping is that by creating the right environment, basically somebody else will come along and solve the problem. They are doing a lot of stuff around skills training and things like that, which is all good work, but actually it's not particularly relevant unless you know you've got the businesses established. They appear to be suggesting that electric arc furnace steel is the way to go because they're talking about DRI, which is a form of semi-worked metal that you can bring in and work through blast furnaces, through electric arc furnaces instead of blast furnaces. So one assumes they're hoping somebody will put EAF in at Scunthorpe and get rid of the ancient permanently breaking down blast furnaces.
That's a lot of money though, isn't it? It's not a
Well, it is, but
cheap
then they spent
thing.
$500 million keeping it open so far since it was rescued. So there's a question mark over how was the money best spent. And that is a big problem to solve because we now collectively or almost own British Steel. That's not quite gone through Parliament, but practically speaking,
Yeah.
the British taxpayer is already running that business. In terms of the other issue I have is it talks about green steel a lot, but we don't make much green steel. And by green steel, that's typically electric arc furnace, which if you manufacture it with low carbon electricity, which we should be able to do in due course, becomes a much lower carbon product. In terms of structural sections, we don't make any in the UK at all now, and we won't until Port Talbot is functioning. And they've just announced that whilst it was supposed to open in 2027, it's now at least 9 months late due to connection issues. And the problem I have with that is the connection issues is something that's specifically addressed in the strategy, that the strategy is supposed to produce policies to address. So on the one headline project, the strategy already appears to not have been able to breathe the way for National Grid or Power Grid or whoever it is to sort those problems out. So I think it's a lot high level thing without enough sort of input on the ground.
Yeah, so there's quite a contradiction there, isn't there, really, of our net zero policies, construction projects wanting lower carbon, greener steel.
Ahead of themselves, in my view, because they want us to buy low carbon steel and they want us to buy it from the UK producers, but they don't produce it yet. The risk with that now is that all of the imported EAF steel, which my understanding is a lot of London projects are being specified with it, is it's going to either be imported at run the risk of a 50% tariff, or these jobs are going to migrate away from it. And then the momentum's lost. How do you get people back onto the idea of buying it when they basically stop bothering?
Yeah, so it's either going to cost them more, or they just won't bother because it's going to cost them more at the end of the day.
Projects are getting shelved left, right, and centre at the moment. I'm aware of 2 large port projects that have already been shelved because of the uncertainties around price and supply. Because, of course, people that had projects in the pipeline, excuse the pun, they've got them all costed, but now they don't know what the steel will cost them when it comes in. So now they're not sure if they've got the finance for the projects. So there's...
So if I'm a construction project, I need, I don't know, 1,000 tons of sections for something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to cost it now, if you like. Where does that leave? What am I doing at the, I don't know, where am I left at the moment, if you see what I mean?
Well, if you're just buying non-EAF steel, then I would imagine you can stick within about a £200 contingency, because there has to be an expectation these measures raise prices. This is the whole point of them. That's how you create a viable economic environment, as it's described. If you want to buy EAF, then you've got a big issue because you're basically rolling the dice. Because if you buy it, if you're big enough to buy it mill direct, then you import it. You've got to worry about whether it's going to be inside or outside a quota. If it's outside a quota, you're going to pay 50% on it, which is 400 odd quid based on current prices. The BCSA are absolutely convinced that the quotas aren't large enough to allow the satisfaction of the EAF requirements, or even the structural steel requirements, never mind the electric arc ones.
Yeah.
But if you're a stockholder, such as ourselves, then actually you've got to try and move your prices in anticipation, because you look at replacement costs. So whilst I wouldn't expect it to be the full 400 and odd pounds from the single measure, it's going to be 200 or 300. So the prices are going to move by that kind of scale, because people can't afford to assume the risk on themselves. I can't buy product in and assume the risk for 50%. I've got to price the product to hopefully recover what it's cost me in quotas and tariffs. when Trump went nuts in the States, we lost $1.5 million on a single transaction into America from Thailand. You can't take those. We lost $7 million in tariff charges. It's not.
So there's just huge uncertainty then. That's what I'm getting from you at the
No, there's
moment.
huge uncertainty. If we're lucky, there'll be a period of time where this carries itself because people have tried to buy forward, as was done in Europe for CBAM. So it might be the case that the first few months don't see this movement. Unfortunately, the other thing is the lack of demand. So what you may see is prices don't go up much because nobody's buying anything, but that's because we're all doing nothing. So there is a major problem then anyway.
With just the construction economy at that point anyway, isn't there?
The other thing you've got is with the prices going up, people can afford less. I mean, I had a meeting with Scottish Water where they've specified EAF for carbon targets across all of their infrastructure projects and now realise that buying it might result in it being 50% dearer. Well, if they're doing a 30-mile pipeline, but the pipe's 50% dearer, do they do a 12-mile pipeline or less pipelines? And then there's less men working doing the pipelines. There's a lot of knock-on effect.
Yeah. Does the pipeline go where it needs to as well?
It'll just be coming out the end 3 miles.
So you obviously, a lot of your business model is obviously reclaim steel. How does that all play into this then?
It doesn't. Well, it doesn't. So reuse, both with CBAM and the steel strategy, is completely ignored. It's not relevant. It's not in there in the slightest. And in not being there specifically, it means that both measures will tax reused or repurposed steel as if it were new. And with strategy,
there's no differentiation basically.
So we've got EPDs for our reclaimed sections, etc. If we were to try to ship them into Europe at the moment, they would be taxed at full whack by CBAM, which is supposed to be a carbon tax because the EPDs aren't admissible. The steel all moves as if it's prime new steel. One of the other big issues that's going to come out, and it is mentioned in the strategy, is melt and pour, because they're looking, as per the states, to look at the original origin of the metal. Now, to look at that in a good ideological concept, it's to stop the Russians invading Ukraine, shipping all the stuff to Saudi or Egypt, reprocessing it, and then it coming into us as material manufactured in one of those countries. But when you get to reused and reclaimed, repurposed material, you don't know where it was made. You haven't got a clue. And all of the legislation to date then drops it into default values. So you end up paying the highest rates, not the lowest rates. So we've got a scenario at the moment where we don't make EAF construction sections, so you can't buy them in the UK without chancing the tariffs. But if you do it based on CBAM, you're going to get taxed as if it were brand new regardless. But it's been the case since you and I met, going back to, or Simon and I, certainly going back to 2012 or whenever it was, with the N1090, the reuse and circular economy is usually just a highfalutin ideological statement in a document and doesn't have any sort of practical guidance thereafter.
Needs teeth, doesn't it? There needs to be that distinguished between those different types of products from a policy point of view, definitely. So when I've been reading about this, and I'm no expert whatsoever, but there's quite an issue, isn't there, with fabricated steel and the tariffs there? Is that still at play?
Oh, very much so, and probably more than not, because from dialogue with government, it seems highly unlikely they're going to change the current proposed structure of the
So do you want to say, maybe explain what's happening with fabricated steel then?
So basically, at the moment, if you bring a steel beam in or a raw steel in, then it's subject to quotas and tariffs. But if you bring your building in as kit form, and it's therefore been fabricated, it's a different product code, and that isn't currently taxed or levied at all. So I was again in a meeting last week where there was an 11,000 ton project, and there was only one UK fabricator on the bidding list because they've gone abroad for it. Because what they're suspecting is that they'll be able to get it fabricated abroad, brought in, and it will not have any quotas or tariffs applied because fabricated steel doesn't. There's a second problem with fabricated steelwork in the detail, which is what is fabricated steelwork? So do I just cut the end off it and say it's been processed, drill a hole in it, say it's been,
Yeah. How far do you go with that?
but then it means that the fabricators are going to lose work and are already talking about work that they've lost. But then there still might be a loophole even after that that could bring material in. And we've seen
Yeah. How many, you may not know this, how many fabricators do we have in the UK? How many businesses?
hundreds. I don't know exactly, but I mean, there's 6 or 7 major players that are into the hundreds of millions of turnover, but then there's the whole downstream. And that's one of my primary worries, because we've seen this in previous recessions. The big guys have to fight for everything. So ultimately, if they're losing work for the big projects they would normally do, they will drill down through the supply chain.
Yeah.
It's all the small guys that you see disappearing first. You might lose 1 or 2 of the big ones. Go back to see how long I've been in the game. You go back to the recession in 2000-ish, and there was a couple of the big ones went then. But normally now they survive at the expense of all of the smaller ones. And they also subcontract a lot of work. So the other thing you'll see is that a lot of the SMEs are doing work for the larger companies. If the larger companies get quiet, they're not putting any of that work out. And that's a problem. It's a problem of construction, not just fabrication.
That's a complete own goal, though, isn't it? I would have from our government there, isn't it?
I would have said so, but all the communication I've had with them suggests that I'm not to worry about it because it's not the intent. I think I've had
But
3.
we all know sometimes policy can have unintended consequences, shall we say, don't we?
Yeah.
Just a reminder, everyone, I haven't got many Q&A questions, so please put a few more in. I think we'll carry on chatting for another sort of 10 minutes, and then go onto the Q&A if that's okay.
One of the other things I
Um,
was,
yeah,
sorry,
go on, Roy. Sorry, you go.
it's quite fundamental, is that the government has huge buying power, but in fact they're not really demonstrating, utilising that in support of this strategy. Now they talk about it, and they could certainly do it, but again, we've seen the carbon capture scheme in Teesside is importing all of the steelwork. And the political defence of that is, well, we placed the contract with the main contractor. They're then free to do what they want. So one of the issues actually with the public procurement aspect of this strategy is that the government doesn't buy steel. It buys tanks, it buys buildings, it buys other things.
Buys the end product,
Yeah, manufacturers are downstream of that. And ultimately, at the moment, it certainly isn't set up enough that the government can drill down to see what activity has been achieved. And I think it's only a fairly bland statement at the moment that projects should seek to have 50% UK produced steel in them. Well, I'm afraid you and I are both long enough in the tooth to remember sort of circular economy type targets. And if you go back in the day, people used to put the target in place, but it was too easy then for the contract to come back and say, oh, but we couldn't get it, so we did this.
Still
And
happens now.
that 50% UK content thing is tricky, because if it's set to a target of product that we don't make, they clearly can't hit it at all. Whereas if it's a product we can make quite easily, then it should be higher than 50% if they're truthfully expecting the rest of British industry to support this strategy and the development.
Yes, there needs to be more nuance there, doesn't there? But as you say, public procurement, as long as I've been in this game, gets talked about a lot, but we never really see any real teeth with it, unfortunately. And as you can say, it gets passed down, and there's always reasons why not to do it, really. That's the issue that we have. What else? Is there anything else you particularly want to raise?
No, not specifically. I think part of the biggest problem, once we know this is going to land, is that it isn't going to be reviewed for 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of economic activity, it's going to be felt long before the reaction. And if you take the idea that the government only can consider things in 12-month bites, and by the time they've decided it needs reviewing, it'll be X months more before any other measures then come into play. The other thing which I think people have to remember is that the EU actually started all of this safeguarding a number of years ago. They actually beat Trump to the trigger on that one. They moved first, and that was basically 8 years ago when that all started in its fullness. And one of the things that clearly the UK government's trying to do is reflect the EU's policies so that we can, in theory, get open trade with them, free trade.
Yeah, like a back-to-back type thing. Yeah.
Guarantee. There was an article last week, I think, in The Guardian, basically saying that Europe now intend to hit us as hard as we would hit them with our policies. So everything seems to be the cart before the horse. So we're going to be we want to produce loads of green steel, but we're not actually producing any. We've got terms of our safeguarding, which is intended to get us into Europe, but we're not in Europe. You can see how it's supposed to set the tone. It just doesn't, to me, in real life, look like it's going to cause the changes that are needed.
Yeah. And I don't, maybe you do or do not want to share this, but if this all happens, where will your business be in a year's time, or what do you see?
Well, we have the advantage because I've got this monumental pile of stuff. So I've got 1,000 tons of stuff that's priced pre all of this. What I'm far more concerned about, and we're already seeing it, is our order intake is dropping month by month. So I'm expecting for us as a business and probably construction as a sector to be in fairly hard recession fairly soon. And increased prices isn't the way that sorts itself out. What normally happens is the market goes quiet, everything gets cheaper, people start to gain confidence to buy things again, and activity picks up. At the moment, we've got a construction sector that's getting quieter and quieter of its own accord, and then we're going to artificially jack the input prices.
Yeah, the two don't work together, do they?
Doesn't sound great to me.
No. Let's have a bit of optimism from you though, Roy, before we move on to the questions. What is there any optimism here?
Well, if it comes along with other parts of other policy, one of the big things is that reuse ducks all of this because it's all pretty much domestic in the first place.
Yeah.
So in theory, there is an opportunity either way. It either makes reuse just more popular because the price isn't dependent on the international uncertainty of pricing, or it makes reuse more viable because, again, when I was doing the talks way back in the day, I used to warn people that steel prices do fluctuate tremendously and that reuse is much more viable when prices are higher than lower. Well, a lot more reuse is going to be a lot more viable if the steel prices clear £1,000 a ton again, which is what they did in the early 2020s, when the reuse really gained momentum in some of the bigger projects. So I can see how reuse could benefit from this, as long as there's enough activity generally to drive it.
Yeah, there's a few. Let's move on to a few questions because there are a few related to reuse, and then maybe we can then go on to a bit of the wider steel strategy ones. I think you may have answered a couple of these. We've got one about, will these measures make it easier to sell reused stock that you currently hold? I think you just addressed that. Is there anything you want to say on that?
No, the only thing is, and it comes down to the same problem with the quotas and tariffs, I don't have everything. So projects could still end up not able to go forward because I've only got 20 or 30% of what's required. And again, on reuse, I normally would advocate only having a 10, 20 or 30% target within the content of the building.
Doesn't cover everything that a project needs at the end of the day. So you've got to deal with everything else from the rest from the 70%. Yeah. But we may have done this. What are the current barriers to steel reuse? Lots of studies been done on this. And how does UK CBAM and UK steel strategy impact steel reuse? I think we've talked quite a lot about this. I mean, you've been doing steel reuse for a long old time now, Roy. We've seen the big projects in London. I know you're trying to have a bit of a push on the domestic sector, aren't you? And Hopefully you'll have some guidance and we can do a webinar on that soon.
Next couple of weeks, yeah.
Oh, that would be good. Maybe that's something we can look up in the autumn. But what is it getting better? Is it getting easier? Is there more projects? Is there a different types of projects?
It's
What are you seeing?
easier. I think barriers are now much more that it isn't normal practice. So if people don't have carbon targets or carbon interest, then reuse isn't considered. So the vast majority of the supply chain, the construction sector, aren't looking toward it. But we're seeing very few jobs that when they require reuse aren't able to then push it through. Whereas if you go back 5 years, we used to see that come unstuck regularly. So the engineer, the architect were driving it, the client wanted it, and then it got to the fabricator or the main contractor and got shelved for a variety of reasons, usually reluctance rather than anything practical.
Yeah, just something a bit different.
Easier than it was. What unfortunately we're seeing at the moment is this lack of activity in construction. So there just aren't the same number of projects at the moment, and a lot of them aren't the bigger catwalk projects, as I would call them. And it's a lot of those that are still driving demand. I think there's a question in the chat I've seen where they were asking, and it says, is it still growing or a handful of committed clients? Well, it is growing, but the growth is slow. But in fact, it's still a bit of preaching to the choir. It's only still growing within the sector of the market that has net zero and carbon on their agenda. Right?
Yeah. Is that why you're looking at targeting domestic a bit more? And you see that as a bit easier anyway in terms of
Well, I think it's easier to sell the smaller jobs, and I think there are more committed consumers that way. And I do think that the domestic environment is easier to reuse material in. The actual application can be more forgiving. When it's part of a large complex structure, connections and all sorts of things become a problem or can become a problem. Whereas if it's just holding somebody's bedroom from falling into the dining room, it's usually just a steel beam that does the job, and that's fine. And as I've always said, as you know, is reusing steel is about not producing new steel. So it doesn't. I don't mind how steel goes on to do with fence posts, cattle crushes, trailers, or the top of the shard. If we prevent new steel being required, then that's the purpose of the exercise in terms of.
That's a win. So the good news is when it's being specified, it is actually happening now. The issue is to get more, or ways to get more to do it, and the state of the construction sector, and just less projects doing it in the first place. There's a question here. We always do a webinar, and when it enters in the reuse territory, we always get the warranty and insurance piece. So we know it can be put, I don't think often as a valid reason. I think of the reason we don't want to do it. Have you engaged in any specific insurance products? I know you do test and you do warranty it, don't you? So yeah, where are you with that, I guess?
Well, we're not in as much as what we've done is, so in order for structural steelwork to be incorporated into a building, then it has to satisfy EN 1090, which is the code for structural steelwork. What we do on the reuse meets all of the requirements of EN 1090. So by the time the fabricator supplies the steel, it's no different in its quality or provenance from new, and therefore the insurers insure it as if it were new. So I do the testing, you get all the results you'd expect of new steel from our secondary steel, and that in turn allows it to be used in applications that it's fit for purpose. And the insurers are comfortable with that. We've met with insurers, we've met with loss adjusters. As long as the supply chain can demonstrate due diligence of fitness for purpose, the insurers haven't got a problem at all.
Yeah. So you don't need its own insurance product. It's tested how it should. It performs how it should.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, I think, where so somebody was asking how much the stuff reaches us. The answer is a very minuscule quantity, but to put that in context, we couldn't take it all if it didn't. At the moment, we've got about 7,000 tons, and I'm not very excited to have much more than that until it sells quicker.
Yeah.
We certainly haven't reached the stage where me recovering it or me selling it is outpacing the stuff I could buy. There is a problem in due course because the scrap cycle is so efficient. And in fact, the steel strategy, I think it said May this year, they're starting a subgroup for scrap specifically. So we might actually see, or almost certainly based on my experience of government, we'll see a clash of interests because they'll start to protect the scrap route to make sure we've got enough input materials for electric arc furnaces at the same time as circular economy is trying to reuse the stuff and not actually melt it down.
Yeah. And that's what happened years ago, you know. We did have quite a thriving reclamation industry. All the policies were targeted to recycling and all the investment, and then that dropped
Yeah.
off. And now, 20 years later, we've kind of realised that. There's a question from Howard. Howard, if you're still on the call, Larry, could you, if Howard wants to ask his question in person, would that be possible?
Yes, let me just unmute him.
Also to say hello to Howard.
Sorry, just bear with me a second.
No worries.
Find him on the list. There we go.
Hi, Howard. Can you hear us? You may, I don't know if you're there or not. Are you there, Howard? Okay, well, I may ask the question for him. So, Howard Button, who I've known for way too many years anyway, major player in the demolition industry. He's asking, is this good? Is this still strategy? Is it good news or bad news for the demolition sector? You know, we know what demolition do. They'll find the best price they can for their for their scrap. That's what they do. Contractors are already looking towards the new Tata Steel plant and increased demand for steel scrap. So I guess what does it mean in your opinion for the demo guys or deconstruction guys?
I think at some point, and it's actually very difficult to estimate when that point will be. I read yesterday or today that they reckon we've got to increase the appropriate type of scrap sevenfold to meet the UK production ambition. So one would assume that the good grades of scrap will actually go up in price quite significantly at some point. But I thought CBAM would do that in Europe, but in fact the Europe market activity is so low overall, and scrap's a global commodity. So in fact the other thing that's happened is with all of the protectionism globally, is Turkey, China, and India are consuming far less scrap because they're selling less product because people aren't asking for it. So they're much, much greater consumers than we are. So if they start consuming less, the global price is going to come down, which means we're left with an artificially inflated or not inflated price in the UK. If scrap rises as I originally thought it would, then the demo guys will do better out of that. And actually, if anything, it would make demolition cheaper because of the way they factor
there's steel pricing
activities. But my confidence 6 months ago that scrap was going to go up was very high. It's much, much lower now. Although I do think when the electric arc furnaces open in Cardiff, it will create a temporary spike if it doesn't do anything else.
again. As you say, it's all this is a commodity. It's all global markets, isn't it? It can be very hard to predict what's going to happen with this. There's a few questions from Misha. I don't know, Larry. Do we want to see if Misha wants to ask them in person?
Yeah, let me just unmute.
You may not want to, Misha, but you have the opportunity. I think you may know each other.
There
Hi,
we go.
Misha. Are you
Misha.
there?
Hello there. Hi. Thanks for your talk.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome to put your camera on if you want, but if you want to, if you want to say your questions now, please do.
It's really just to ask that last question about how you think if you could do one thing tomorrow to make steel reuse scale. That's where I'm interested. I work as an architect and I'm kind of interested in how the reuse sector can be made more effective. So I was just wondering what you would do. And I think you've sort of answered it, and I know that it's partly a kind of market situation, but what we can do to sort of effectively make better use of reused steel.
I think fundamentally it ends up being a legislative or statutory thing, because the one place where we've seen increased activity is London, where the GLA have actually got carbon targets and carbon quotas and things within their planning rotas and things like that. At the moment, there is no requirement for anybody else to do it, so you're requiring the entire supply chain to be bought in. An ambitious client isn't always enough if they haven't got cooperative engineers, architects, fabricators, and contractors. And we see it go wrong for there's reasons as simple as the local builder on small projects has his own pet fabricator who doesn't buy from us. Therefore, he doesn't want reused steel because he wants to use his mate to do the building. So I think until there's legislative requirement for circular economy or reuse, and it's formally recognised within standards, because you won't find the word reuse, I don't think, in the steel strategy at all. Because it's the recycling and what have you that's still considered to be the green solution. So that's my answer to what single thing. You need a legislative change.
Do we think that's going to happen? Right, there's just a few quick questions. What are the time scales for all of this? I think the quotas come in. When do they come in? It's not long, is it? July?
July. 1st of July for quotas and 1st of January for CBAM. But don't expect to get any real warning, because in Europe, where they'd been planning CBAM for about 4 years, they didn't announce the measures until the 15th of December for a 1st of January implementation. We're hearing nothing from the UK government about CBAM at the moment, other than the fact it's coming.
Yeah.
That's another issue I have with the current quotas and safeguards, is that all has to be handled by HMRC. And as a business, none of us have got the first clue who or what or where is there to handle it.
Yeah. What does that actually mean?
It definitely means a massive increase in their workload. So if they actually increase the staff, a different system, or any of those things are unknown.
Right, one last question. This is quite a precise question, so we can have a go at it anyway. Do you think the reason the strategy is pushing for EAF might be to do with the forthcoming technologies such as the Cement to Zero project aimed at using the steel industry, so using scrap in the UK to decarbonise concrete? So a bit of a link between the two there.
No.
Not thought of that.
No,
Probably need to think about that one, don't we?
No, I think that we're going to EAF because it's the cheaper technology for manufacturing steel. It relies mostly solely on electricity and scrap, both of which we should have as a natural resource, so to speak, in the UK. And the blast furnace at the end of the day is processing material that we don't actually have in iron ore. So I do think the move to EAF is two things. It's the natural movement based on the resources that we have, and it's a cheaper answer. And I have a feeling the second one's probably more powerful than the first.
Okay, and I guess last but not least, I can't find the question now, but someone put in, what can we do about all of this? Everyone listening, is there anything are we just going to have to accept it and hold our breath and see what happens? Is there anything we can do proactively to sort of say, I know, Roy, you've been very active in your communication, but is there anything as ASBP we can do and other people on the webinar?
As one of the MPs on the Business and Trade Committee said to us, make noise. But then in terms of the noise, I think the thing in the context of this audience is the big problem is that the circular economy is just getting left out of all of this stuff. And I think it involves people having to get more involved. It's the steel strategy. One of the big first answers they come back with is, we had a consultation that finished in July 25. You've missed it. Now, they don't put it quite as bluntly as that, but that's what they're telling us. Well, none of us knew they were doing that because normal sized businesses don't have lobbying departments, aren't across government bodies. So you've just got to be more aware. And then when there's stuff that's going on that's not right, I mean, the construction products white paper, that was a disaster
Yes.
for circular economy, and that was for construction products. But then how many people actually took 5 minutes to consult? And consulting can just be writing, this is a disaster for circular economy. And that's
Yeah. I think it's still getting that
and that's
message
what
out
it
there, isn't it?
work. So you've got to make noise. You've got to get involved.
Yeah. Right. Well, with that, we're going to have to close it now because it is 1 o'clock. Larry has put a link into the feedback form on the chat. So please fill that in if you get a minute. That would really, really help us. I think what we're going to, obviously, there's not many slides to this webinar. So what we'll probably do is, I'm not sure what we'll do. I have to talk to Larry and Simon, but we'll do something in terms of sort of disseminating it and maybe summarising the main points of our chat. A very, very big thank you to Roy for giving up his brain, his very big brain on this subject, and for frankly sharing his opinion. I wouldn't expect anything else from Roy. So thank you very much, and thank you all for attending. I do hope it's been an interesting hour. I hope we haven't been too pessimistic, but definitely realistic, I guess. And we do have to.
And people can get in touch if people want to contact me directly for whatever reason. That's all good.
Yeah, and make some noise. We have to think about how we do that. But thank you very much, everyone. And for my selfish purposes, I've also learnt a lot. So it's been really useful for me. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a nice afternoon.